I recently took a poll on YouTube with 176 votes showing that in 2010 was the preferred running back room of Bills Mafia. Can the Buffalo Bills running back room in 2023 be the best that we've ever had? And looking at a poll that I took here with 176 votes, a lot of people would prefer Marshawn Lynch, Fred Jackson, and CJ Spiller as a running back group for this training camp and preseason. And the way I worded this was somewhat a trick question, and we are going to answer whether Damien Harris is going to have double-digit touchdowns or not a little bit later. I did a poll on Instagram, but I really think this year's Buffalo Bills could be the best running back room that we've had since 2010. You could see 176 votes. Which running back room would you have rather had during training camp in preseason? A little bit of a trick question, but in 2010 got 71% of the votes, and then in 2023 we got 20% of the votes. And down here I did make a note: CJ Spiller, a rookie in 2010, Devin Singletary, a rookie in 2019, and James Cook, a rookie in 2022. At first glance you could say, hey look, 2010 Marshawn Lynch, Fred Jackson, CJ Spiller would be the preferred running back group, but we have to understand a few things before we dive into the actual stats. One, the NFL has really changed since 2010. This is a passing league now. The NFL rules have changed. And then two, the players that were here in 2010, such as Marshawn Lynch, was traded away. So we technically didn't have him for the entire season. And then three, the rookies in 2010 was CJ Spiller, Devin Singletary in 2019, and then in 2022, James Cook. The real question is Damien Harris, Latavius Murray, and James Cook in year two going to be better statistically than any running back room since 2010? I put together this spreadsheet so we can clearly see. We have Marshawn Lynch, Fred Jackson, CJ Spiller, LaShawn McCoy, Devin Singletary, and James Cook. In the left column, we have some other running backs that were here on the team that just didn't have big time totals. But what I did was I added up the top three running backs' yards, total receptions, total touchdowns, total receiving yards, and total receiving touchdowns to get a clear total over here. In 2010, the Buffalo Bills had Marshawn Lynch, Fred Jackson, and CJ Spiller. But again, Marshawn Lynch was decided to be traded away after drafting CJ Spiller in the first round. Total yards, we could see, didn't lead any year from 2010 to 2022. You're going to see the stat leaders, and we're going to break it down at the very bottom. But 1374 total rushing yards, 11 total rushing touchdowns, 56 receptions for 379 yards, and 3 touchdowns. Now, the following year, in 2011, the Buffalo Bills had Tashard Choice instead of Marshawn Lynch, and we could see here that the Buffalo Bills had 762 receiving yards, which ends up being a high, running back room high for receiving yards. But look at the yards. It actually went up from 2010 to 2011 without Marshawn Lynch. All touchdowns went down just by 1. Fred Jackson with 934 total rushing yards, with CJ Spiller having 561 rushing yards. 6 touchdowns for Fred Jackson, 4 touchdowns for CJ Spiller. And we could see that they killed it here with total receiving yards: 442 receiving yards for Fred Jackson, 269 receiving yards for CJ Spiller, and Tashard Choice actually had 51 receiving yards too as well. In 2012, the Buffalo Bills had the same running back room as the year before. They actually mustered up more rushing yards and also had the same amount of rushing touchdowns. The receptions dropped off, receiving yards dropped off, but they had 1 more receiving touchdown. 2013, the Buffalo Bills reached their highest rushing total, and we could see it was 1,949 yards. That was with Fred Jackson, CJ Spiller, and also Tashard Choice. For the third year in a row, the Buffalo Bills had the same running back room, and they mustered 1,949 yards, went back to 11 touchdowns rushing, the same total in 2010 with Marshawn Lynch, Fred Jackson, and C.J. Spiller. So they did an excellent job. 2014, the Buffalo Bills move on from Tashard Choice. They bring in Anthony Dixon. Anthony Dixon had 432 yards rushing, 2 rushing touchdowns, 8 receptions, 49 yards receiving. But Fred Jackson, 525 yards, 2 touchdowns. Right? C.J. Spiller was banged up that year, 300 yards, 0 rushing touchdowns, 19 receptions. And one thing we could see that the 2014 running back room led the Buffalo Bills the past decade in is total receptions, 93 total receptions. Very interesting to see. In 2011, they had more receiving yards, 85 receptions, 93 receptions, but only 675 receiving yards. 2 touchdowns receiving, 2 touchdowns receiving. 2015, the Buffalo Bills and Carlos Williams tearing the league up. He had 517 total rushing yards, 7 rushing touchdowns. He even had 11 receptions for 96 yards. Mike Gillislee was the other running back there, 267 total rushing yards and 3 rushing touchdowns. LaShawn McCoy was brought in. This was the year we moved on from Fred Jackson, C.J. Spiller. They were no longer. LaShawn McCoy comes to Buffalo, and he comes away with 895 rushing yards, 3 rushing touchdowns, 32 receptions for 292 yards receiving, and 2 touchdowns. So here, the Buffalo Bills actually led all running back rooms with 4 receiving touchdowns. Very interesting to see the lesser amount of receptions, 49 receptions compared to 93, only 2 receiving touchdowns. Here we had 4 receiving touchdowns. 2016, the Buffalo Bills have Mike Gillislee and Jonathan Williams. Reggie Bush were also mixing in there as well. LaShawn McCoy had 1,267 rushing yards, 13 rushing touchdowns, 50 receptions, 356 yards, and 1 receiving touchdown. Absolutely the best season for a running back since 2010. LaShawn McCoy was the real deal there, and you could see we led the running back room with 23 total touchdowns. Absolutely unreal. When you add up all the running backs rushing totals here, it was 1,935 yards, 67 receptions for 496 receiving yards and 2 touchdowns. In 2017, with LaShawn McCoy, Mike Tolbert, and Travarius Cadet, the Buffalo Bills had 1,138 yards rushing, 6 rushing touchdowns, 59 receptions, 448 total yards. Didn't lead any pack here, but still halfway decent stat. Following year in 2018, Chris Ivory and Marcus Murphy make an appearance for Bills Mafia. Look at here with LaShawn McCoy having the lowest total that he had in Buffalo, only 514 rushing yards, 3 rushing touchdowns, 34 receptions for 238 yards. And you're going to see LaShawn McCoy was not here the following year, and the rushing total was one of the lowest. I think it was the actual lowest out of all years. You could see right there that 1,149 rushing yards in 2018 was the absolute lowest rushing total that the Buffalo Bills had. 2019, the Buffalo Bills bring in Frank Gore, and they part ways with Devin Singletary with a young rookie Devin Singletary. So adding up Frank Gore's 599 total rushing yards, 2 rushing touchdowns, all his receptions, Devin Singletary with his 775 total rushing yards, 2 rushing touchdowns, his receptions, his receiving yards, his receiving touchdowns. Buffalo Bills, 1,437, 4 rushing touchdowns, 55 receptions for only 418 yards and 2 rushing touchdowns. 2020, a lot of people would assume this was probably the worst year for the Buffalo Bills running back room, but we already saw 2018 looked to be a little bit worse. But Zach Moss, a young rookie, only had 418 yards, 4 rushing touchdowns. You look at Devin Singletary, who had a little bit of a step back from his rookie year, less rushing yards at 687, the same amount of rushing touchdowns at 2. He had more receptions for a little bit more yards, but no receiving touchdowns. So the Bills, 1,238, 6 rushing touchdowns, 53 receptions for 386 yards and 2 touchdowns. 2021, the Buffalo Bills got a little bit better. Zach Moss not being a rookie anymore. Devin Singletary progressing into being a pro, but Zach Moss took a step back from his rookie year, having 418 rushing yards, now only having 345. He had the same amount of rushing touchdowns with 4 and 4. We could see Devin Singletary back up to his high as total rushing with 877 rushing touchdowns, 40 receptions, 228 yards, and 1 receiving touchdown. So Devin Singletary was the best version of himself in 2021. You could see the total 1,340 yards, 12 rushing touchdowns, 70 receptions for 497 yards, and 4 touchdowns receiving, which was a two-way tie in the total amount of receiving touchdowns by a running back. Last year, the Bills part ways with Zach Moss, who still had 91 yards, 0 touchdowns. We could see Devin Singletary, 819 total rushing yards, 5 rushing touchdowns. James Cook, 507 rushing yards, 2 rushing touchdowns. We could see the total was better than 2021 by 100 yards, 1,417 rushing yards, 7 rushing touchdowns, 5 less rushing touchdowns. And you could see the receptions, 66 receptions, 287 compared to 497. What I want to take a look at are the total rushing yards for Latavius Murray and Damian Harris, not only in 2022, but 2021, both years when they were not on the Buffalo Bills. Let's see if they're capable of breaking these records or being the best running back group for the Buffalo Bills. You could see in 2022, the Buffalo Bills with James Cook, Damian Harris, and Latavius Murray all playing on different teams. We could add up their totals. It was 1,672 yards, 10 rushing touchdowns, 64 receptions for 401 yards, and 1 touchdown. Now I added up 2021 when Damian Harris actually wasn't hurt. He had a whole successful season, and I added it with 2022 James Cook, 2022 Latavius Murray. Look at the total yards, 2,139 rushing yards, 22 rushing touchdowns. Before we jump into these totals, I took a poll on my Instagram. Will Damian Harris score double-digit touchdowns? In 2021, he had 15 rushing touchdowns. You could see a 75% said yes, 25% said no. This was based on more than 100 votes. Can James Cook, Damian Harris, and Latavius Murray lead all running back rooms since 2010, potentially be the best running back room here in Buffalo? In order for James Cook, Damian Harris, and Latavius Murray to be known to be the best running back group here in Buffalo, they have to lead in 2 of these areas, because we saw no running back room led in 2 areas. So I think the Buffalo Bills could easily get the most amount of rushing yards. And you look at the total here, 2,139, clearly higher than the 1,949 yards. And then the total touchdowns, 22 total touchdowns, was 23 total touchdowns was the highest for Bills Mafia. Now the receptions and receiving yards and receiving touchdowns, you could see does not look like they are going to be the best at receiving yards and receiving touchdowns. But I really believe with Damian Harris, James Cook, and Latavius Murray, they have the skill sets and they have the stats in their past to prove that they could lead the Buffalo Bills running back room in the total amount of rushing yards and also rushing touchdowns. But first glance, we might look and see Marshawn Lynch, Fred Jackson, and CJ Spiller. Look at LaShawn McCoy and Frank Gore and Devin Singletary. But when you take a look at the numbers and the stats do not lie. And then you also couple that with the fact that they really weren't even here. Marshawn Lynch got traded in 2010. LaShawn McCoy was let go before the season started when we brought in Frank Gore. I just wanted to make this video to prove to you what this running back room is fully capable of doing in 2023. I think a lot of people are discounting the fact that the Buffalo Bills running back room is clearly upgraded from just last year in 2022 and 2021. I really believe the Buffalo Bills are going to be benefiting so much than what people expect from this running back room in 2023. And if you guys enjoyed this video, it would really support me in my efforts pulling up all these stats, spending hours on this spreadsheet to present you guys a wealth of information, some great entertainment. Hit like, subscribe, support me in my efforts. I would really, really appreciate it. Go Bills.